What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and you're listening to Black and Published on the Mahogany Books Podcast Network, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. And I'm excited to share with you 5 of my favorite episodes from the last 4 seasons. This week, we're going to throw it back to Season 2 and my conversation with award-winning author Honorée Jeffers, author of the epic novel The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, The Age of Phyllis, and several other poetry collections. What I love about this episode is how gracious Miss Honorée was with her time. I had asked for 90 minutes, like I always do, for interviews. Her team was like, "Sis, you get an hour, okay?" And then, once I got on the call, Miss Honorée said we could go longer. But it wasn't only her time that I was grateful for, but also how generous she was and vulnerable she was in answering my questions about her journey as a scholar, an author, her inspirations, and the influences of her family. And then, after we finished recording, she talked to me for another 15 minutes about my own writing career and said, "Sister, it's time for you to get an agent," which I did, and we'll talk more about me at a later date. But for now, here is Deeply Profound with Honorée Jeffers. When did you know that you were a writer?
When I was a little girl, I used to write little bitty stories when I was like in 3rd grade. But now my mama remembers that I started writing stories when I was in kindergarten. And she said that I wrote a story and I gave it to her and said I wanted to get it published. And I may have thought about publication because my daddy was a poet, a Black Arts Movement poet.
Ooh.
Lance Jeffer is my daddy.
You say you started off writing stories, but your father was a Black Arts Movement poet. So is that what drew you more to poetry in your career?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I fought being a poet.
Really?
Because of my father. But he was a very brilliant man, and he cast a very big shadow. As a matter of fact, I would go to conferences with Black poets of his cohort, and they would always remind me that I would never be the poet that he was. And they're right. I'm not the poet that he is. I'm a different poet. But in terms of my empathy in my work, I would say that's my mother's empathy, Dr. Trella Lee James Jeffers. And Mama is actually a beautiful writer, but she spent, as women have been wont to do in history, she edited his work and helped him with his work. And so I think in a real way, I'm doing this not just for me, but, the cultural stories that I tell are, inspired by her voice. And my own voice is in there, but she gave me the land and she gave me the culture and she gave me the people. That was not my father. And so I think I do a lot of what I do for her.
Ooh, that resonates. Ooh. I think I definitely see that influence in the novel itself and how you gave voice to Jessie Fawcett, just not being an aside to Dr. Du Bois's career. And
he took credit. Listen now, I love me some Dr. Du Bois. I love some Dr. Du Bois. But if we're going to keep it real, he took credit for a lot of her work. I want to give credit to her. In the same way that, Belle, the protagonist's mother, Belle, she stays in the background, but we know she has a very strong voice.
Yes. I love how you gave her her own voice in her own chapter. A lot of that chapter was triggering for me as a wife and a mother. Like the line where you say, "I got to take the baby to a bathroom." My daughter's only 3 months.
And so when I go to the bathroom, I take her with me to the bathroom.
There's a lot that has to be balanced with the women. And I wanted to tell that story at the same time I was telling a very intellectual story, a very historical story, because I think that people act like you have to choose, right? You either tell the domestic interior or you tell a serious literary, intellectual book. And I said, no, I'm going to show people that this is what goes on in Black communities simultaneously.
Yes, and it was so very well done. I think I knew I was in for a good ride and a good read when Ailey says, I think she's a little girl at the very beginning. She said, "It's like, are you in there talking to yourself?" It's like, I am, but it's an intelligent conversation. I was like,
I
oh,
am.
I'm ready for it.
She was in 9th grade, right? You know, my mother used to always say that when I say I'm talking to myself. She said, "Well, make it an intelligent conversation," you know. So my mama has these little things that she'll say. I only stole a couple of them, right? But I make up my own. She would make up, I get that from mama. She would make up her own sort of proverbs and different things like that. So I made up my own proverbs. Like there's one where Belle is talking about her brother Roscoe and says, everybody in Putnam County knew that boy was crazy, plus a full tank of gas. I just came up with that, you know, because my family would sort of come up with these sort of things. It's very literary, but it's not viewed as such.
I think
you know.
my favorite is if wishes were horses, assholes would ride.
If wishes were horses, assholes would ride. I enjoyed that
I
part.
cackled.
You know, that was funny to me. And I wanted there to be humor in the book because there's so much pain in the book, you know. So, but I look at this as a blues novel. That's what the blues does. The blues negotiates pain, you know, sorrow and joy, sometimes sexuality, sometimes heartbreak, sometimes references to racism,
Mhm.
you know, all of that. But then there's humor to try to work through the bad feeling. So that's what I was trying to do.
And having so many of those unique turns and bends of a phrase and, doing language like Toni Morrison says, do you attribute that or credit that from your background and strength as a poet to then do that in prose?
Oh yes. I think that you know, people are definitely seeing my poetry. But it's kind of funny, sister, because there were many drafts of this novel. I brought it to my agent. My agent is my first editor. She's the first person that believed that I could write a novel, even when I did not want to write a novel. And she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Mm.
So I brought, you know, one of the drafts back and she said, "What happened? You ripped all the poetry out of this." And I said, "Sarah," that's, you know, her name's Sarah Burns. I said, "Sarah, you know, don't you think it's cheating that I have poetry in here?" And she said, "Cheating how? This is your language. This is your book." She said, "Ani, what did you do?" That's my nickname. And I said, "Well," I said, "all right." So then I went and I redid it and I brought it back and she said, "Oh, thank God." You know, but you know, but these are the things when you don't have confidence in
Mm.
yourself. Well, I had been laughed at. I was at a conference, I won't say when and I won't say where. But there was a group of writers, female women writers. One of them was Black. And when I said, "I write fiction too," they all started laughing at me.
Oh.
And so it hurt my feelings real deep. But I have to tell you, before that moment, never really had any desires for my fiction to see the world. But when them women started laughing at me, I thought, watch me work. And that was the moment that I became a fiction writer, I think, like a serious fiction writer. When they laughed at me, and I've joked with people, I sure hope don't nobody ever laugh and say, you can never be a physicist. Because once someone tells me I can't,
you have to prove that you can.
I have to prove that I can. And it took a while for the love and the passion of it to come to me instead of just, I'll show you, right?
This is a hell of a revenge book.
Well, I did my best. I did my best. And I had a lot of encouragement, but it really wasn't until I'd say maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that I really felt like, oh, okay, I can do this.
Ooh. Let's talk about that, those feelings of insecurity and the doubt when you're coming to your own work, because I've heard you say it in a few different interviews that you just wanted this book to be a beach read. Like before you said,
I did just want it to be a beach read.
Yeah, like
everybody laughed at me.
But it's like, because I wrote like a beach read, really? But it's like, I guess I could see if you're not confident, you just want to do it as quickly as possible. Or, your editors and your agents are telling you, we need a novel. And you're like, I just want to do short stories. And I see how that can be when you're not sure that you can even do this big thing that you want to do. How did you overcome those feelings? Or is it still ongoing that you're overcoming it because the book is now out?
Well, wow, these are some beautiful questions, sister. Well, the whole notion of I just wanted to do a beach read was not just my confidence, but the fact that I was deep in the middle of writing The Age of Phyllis, which is the poetry book that came out last year. And I really felt like I had to give the proper attention to Miss Phyllis, to Phyllis Wheatley Peters. And so I didn't really know if I had any more to give to another book. Now what I realize is that I'm always working on several books at the same time. The reason that I do that is because I can become very depressed if the words aren't flowing, okay, on one project. And so then I will pivot to another project to make sure that I'm always working, right? I'll pivot. Sometimes that pivot is overt and intentional, and sometimes I'll just start dreaming and I'll wake up and I'll write something down, and it doesn't become apparent until months or sometimes years later what I'm doing. So to get back to, the whole notion of the beach read, yes, some of it was my confidence. Some of it was I was writing on another book. And some of it was, I'm from the deep South. So you're reared not to think too well of yourself. Okay. So what I'm about to say is deeply uncomfortable for me to say. Okay. I don't think I really understood how profound my thinking was. And I think that is because I had listened to people who had diminished me. I have a deep Southern accent. You hear that. Also, the way I carry myself is just like a regular sister. I've always been this way. I think that when people see me on stage when I'm reading, right, even if it's a stage in a classroom, right, that's when they see the power that I carry within, right? But I think also that what people should understand is that the power that I carry within is not just my power. Okay. It's an ancestral power that I had to accept that was my duty, my charge. It took a while for it to become a joy. There was a moment where it was a burden, because there's a lot that you carry when you write about the ancestors, commune with the ancestors, when you're a deeply spiritual person. And I think that people still have a white Western idea about how intellect is supposed to walk in the world. And this, what I look like, a deep brown Black woman nudging in the dark skin, kinky curly hair, wearing my little quirky outfits because I'm always going to be cute at all times.
Yes.
You know, sometimes I move back and forth in, you know, from quote unquote the standard dialect to the vernacular. I code switch. One of my favorite songs is Pony. Right? So every time I'm on an Instagram live, I'm like, y'all, like, go play Pony. What's up? Right. That's not the way that brilliance is supposed to walk in the world. Okay. And so therefore, I believed that for many years. It took me a long time to accept that I am extraordinary. It wasn't until Miss Lucille took me under her wing, because Miss Lucille was the same way. Just a regular sister. But I'm telling you, the extraordinary mind of that woman, right? And her ability to see past, present, and future all at once, right? She was a visioning woman. And I met her right around the time that I became a visioning woman. And so she helped me with that. But I think it's very difficult. I think even though I'm a radical feminist, it's very difficult for me as a woman to take, you know, to consider myself to be as smart as a man. I'm being honest here, right?
Thank you.
Miss Lucille met me during a real needful time. And Miss Lucille, she saved me. And that's why I always lift up her name wherever I am, because she saved me. I remember when I was coming up for tenure, and she came out here to Oklahoma to give a reading at Oklahoma City. And it was a time, because there was only one other Black woman in the department who had tenure. And so I showed up at the auditorium, and there were white colleagues of mine in the room. And before the reading, though, before I saw them, I saw Miss Lucille. Somebody came and tapped me on my shoulder. They said, somebody wants to talk to you. And I turned, and it was Miss Lucille. And I ran across. I threw myself dramatically at her feet, right? And I said, Miss Lucille, I'm having a horrible week. They are trying to destroy Black women this week. And she said, Ani, they have been, you know, real cool and calm. They have been trying to destroy Black women since we got off the ship.
Yeah.
So you better get your mind right. But let me tell you what she did. This is what I'm trying to say about how she moved in the world. So she knew that I was being tormented, right, during that tenure process. And when she stood from behind the podium, she was reading and she was holding people in the palm of her hand. And then she said, My good friend, Ani Jeffers, is in the audience. And she began to talk about me. And I saw these white folks on my job looking across the room at me. She could have called anybody's name, but she called mine. That's why I love Black women, because at our best, that's what we do.
Yes. And you mentioned that Miss Lucille was with you when you began to dream. And you've talked a lot about how in trying to navigate what Ailey's story was going to be, that you began to dream of the ancestors.
Yes.
So before we get to to your reading, how has coming to understand your dreams and your own visioning of your art and your intellect, how has that influenced you to give you, I guess, permission, for lack of a better word, to put out this text that you have?
I'm an Afro-Indigenous person, okay? So I'm what we call Black presenting. I am African American. I was reared as African American, but I have Native American ancestry. It has been a real journey for me to be able to feel like I had permission to write an Afro-Indigenous story. But I have been encouraged by Native American colleagues like the great Gary Hobson, the great Kimberly Weezer, one of my former students who's now a very accomplished scholar and poet, Rain Gomez. I've been encouraged to write that story. It wasn't until I came out here to Oklahoma, which is, you know, the site of the final removal site of the Southeastern tribes, that I began to understand that very highly educated Native American scholars view oral tradition and visioning as a valid way to transfer knowledge and to acquire knowledge, okay? So I came out here around 2002. Miss Lucille was still living, and we would have conversations. We wouldn't have them every day, every week, every month, but whenever we would talk, there would always be this depth of discussion. And that is when I began to sort of expand my view of what intellect was, and also to understand that the visions that I was having were not separate in another category, but they were part of my creative journey. And this is happening at the same time that I'm beginning to look at my historical research as also being part of my creative journey. All right. But you got to understand, I started having visions back in graduate school, back in like 1994, 1995. So we're talking about 8 years, right, into this. But I also say this, and I'm not trying to, you know, scare anybody or be whatever. You ignore the ancestors to your own peril. They will punish. They will punish. You will have nightmares. You will wake up with scratches on your face.
Yeah, they get rowdy.
And so I think they will get extremely rowdy.
Yeah, they
will get rowdy. And so I think that I talk about ancestral connections differently than, for example, Toni Morrison, right? She too was a visioning woman, you know, because she talks about the way that beloved
yes.
first came to her was a woman climbing out of the
Water.
water, right? She had a vision. So I think that if you're paying attention, you know that there are deeply spiritual women among that whole cadre of Black women of the 70s and the 80s who all hung together, right? Sonny Sanchez was very good friends with Toni Morrison. Sonny Sanchez and Miss Lucille were very good friends. Toni Morrison was Miss Lucille's editor at Random House. Toni Morrison helped to nurse Toni Cade Bambara when she was passing away. Alice Walker was in the, so there's a whole cadre of them. But I think that, again, you have to be very intentional with the way that you look at things, because other folks aren't really aware of this. Even some Black people who aren't aware of Black literary history do not understand that all of these women were, together,
Yes.
and they were all very spiritually connected.
That's beautiful. And so, in talking about that literary history of women who are all connected, you have done that with your novel and following your main characters, Ailey Pearl's matrilineal line. So let's get to the reading, and then I definitely want to ask people questions from the book.
Okay.
And for those who don't know, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois is an epic novel spanning the generations of a Georgia family through the eyes of one woman, Ailey Pearl Garfield.
So I'm going to read from a portion of work about Ailey's favorite sister, who's Lydia. If Lydia Garfield's life were a song, it would have been a blues, like her Uncle Huck sang down at the family reunion every summer, plucking his banjo, crooning in a baritone, while Mr. Luke, the man who was the love of Uncle Huck's life, clapped his hands and patted his feet. And everybody in the yard urged Uncle Huck to sang that song, but they didn't pay attention to the words, that Uncle Huck sang the pain of his life, that he had to call Mr. Luke his best friend, though Mr. Luke and he were joined forever, as tightly as if they'd stood in front of a preacher and said vows. The folks ignored the tender, bold touches between the two men, the pats on the shoulder, the forehead kisses. The folks called out praise instead. Boy, that Huck sure could sing. Got that voice smooth like butter. Maybe that's what Lydia had done when she picked up her habit. She was trying to sing her pain, knowing that for the rest of her life, she had a burden to tote. She could never put it down. It didn't matter how pretty people said Lydia was. Pretty wasn't shit. Pretty didn't mean a goddamn thing. When people called Lydia that, they might as well have spit in her face, because the man who first called her pretty had been the one who'd handed her this load. There were other names she was called at school: red bone, high yellow, light-skinned, sedity heifer, the one who thinks she cute. But Lydia was never called ugly. Her beauty was assumed because of her paleness, her hair that reflected light, her eyes that changed colors depending on her outfit. Pretty, pretty girl. Her grandfather had called her that back when she was 6 years old, back when he used to hurt her. She didn't remember when it started, only that when she emerged into memory, the hurting already was a fact of her life. When Lydia met the young man who would become her husband, he made the mistake of commenting on her looks. He'd almost lost his chance with those 3 words she'd heard too many times. Hey, pretty girl, don't call me that. She turned her back on the young man, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Most Black folks didn't like that gesture, and they didn't use it often, only when she wanted to be rude on purpose to make a point that she knew what people thought of her. High yellow girl, sedity heifer. She felt her anger rise like a bear moving in a cave, ready to come out, ready to attack. It was Lydia's sophomore year of Rutledge College, and she'd ridden a car packed with her sorority sisters to Atlanta for the Morehouse basketball game. But none of them wanted to see who won. They'd crossed over for beta the week before and were anxious to show off in their orange and white jackets with their line names printed on the back, to make their beta call to their sisters from the Spelman chapter, and maybe score some numbers from some cute Morehouse dudes. At the concession stand, there was that guy trying to flirt, saying the wrong things, though he was good looking. Tall, very slender, a chocolate brother with real smooth skin, too handsome and well groomed for Lydia's taste, like he spent a lot of time in front of the mirror. He wore a blue velvet tracksuit with the jacket unzipped to reveal his white t-shirt, a white Kangol hat, like he thought he was LL Cool J. Those gold chains around his neck, Bama with a capital B. When Lydia flipped her hair, the guy told her, "Be careful." She didn't want that wig to fall off. She turned back outraged. "This is my own hair." "Yeah, it's yours if you bought it." He looked so serious, she didn't know he was teasing until he asked her, could he have one of her hot dogs? She let him move closer. She guessed he was all right. "You got $1?" "Oh, that's cold, woman. They don't cost but 75 cents a piece." "I'm trying to make a profit. Times are tough these days." "You kind of skinny to be eating 4 hot dogs." He lifted her wrist, but she didn't pull away. His touch was warm. "I'm a little piece of leather, but well put together." He threw his head back, laughing. He told her his name, Dante Anderson, and wanted to know where was she from. She sounded proper, but didn't nobody say stuff like that unless they were from the country. Lydia told him she was from up north, from the city, but her mother's people lived in Chickasetta. She gave him her name, but wouldn't give him her phone number. "Chickasetta? So your people from the country then. I bet you can burn. You know how to fry pork chops?" "Lydia, damn, brother, you must be hungry. First you want my hot dogs, now you're looking for a home-cooked meal." He laughed again and moved forward in the line with her, though his friend was motioning. It was time to leave.
Thank you. So reading the book, when we get to the end of that first song and you give the lineage of the book that you're going to go through, I was like, well, this is like reading the Bible when you get to the New Testament in Matthew and they give the lineage of Jesus. And I was like,
I did that on purpose.
I see that. I was like, oh.
I did that on purpose because this is a holy lineage of Black women.
It very much gives that feeling. But and going back to what you said earlier about, the oral tradition and holding on to memory, why was it so important for you to write this history down? Even though it's fiction, it's still history. Why was it so important for you to do that?
Well, I've noticed that every maybe 10 years, people forget what has come before. And I view Black literature and Black women's literature in particular to be sacred to me. Black literature saved my life as a young girl. And I know that my story, the particulars of my story may be unique to me, but the fact that the literature saved a life is not particular. There are many people who feel that way. And so for me, when you read the book, it's not just a family story. It's not just a story of America. It's not just a story of how this region came to be what it is today. There are also gestures towards Black women in the book, right? Ida B. Wells Barnett, Jessie Fawcett, Zornell Hurston, Alice Walker. We get very quick references to Kimberly Crenshaw, James Baldwin, and of course, the great W.B. Du Bois. And so I wanted it to be an emotional archive that people could come back to. And it makes me feel good when the young folk, young Black folk in particular. I mean, I want everybody to read my book, but I did write this book for my people, as the great Margaret Walker Alexander wrote, for my people with their dirges and their deities, right? This is for my people. So I wanted, them to be able to learn from something, but don't nobody want to be lectured to, or have something shoved down their throat. So I wanted to give an emotional archive that was filled with beauty, right? And so, I want to give people something so that when I'm gone, I left something. I didn't just take. So it is very important for me to impart this Black woman's matrilineal story, because I feel like Black women are always in the background. And the only time we get pulled to the forefront is when somebody want to use us. And so I wanted to bring us, it's our time now. I've said that before. It's our time now to step out into the light.
And in stepping into the light and illuminating these stories of these Black women, you did not hold back on the brutality they faced or experienced and how they headed it off. And you saying that the book is a blues song. How did you feel writing such brutal chapters alongside, the fun coming of age story? Because I tweeted this to you. I was like, oh, it was all fun and games and the coming of age story. It was
all fun and games before we got to that song.
Yes.
And then, well, one of the things before I talk overtly about the brutality, my sister, one of the things that I try to make an implicit promise to the reader that, yes, you're going to have to walk through this horrible tunnel, but there will be joy when you get through there. Okay. The joy is that we are all here, Black people. We were not meant to survive. Okay. So I make that promise to the reader without even giving spoilers. I let them know it's going to be all right once you get on the other side of it. But you've got to travel through this. And one of the reasons we have to travel through this, it is an insult to our ancestors to say that you want reparations, but you don't want to hear about what they went through. Everything in that book is historically possible. Okay? The brutality against Black women has been documented by people who do work on slavery history. There's also, when I talk about the I'm trying to be very delicate here, the intimate abuse of children, of Black girl children. The age of intimate consent in Georgia before it became a state in the 18th century going forward was 10 years old. So anyone with some critical analysis skills, some logic skills can say to themselves, well, if this was happening to free white children,
what was happening to enslaved Black children?
What were happening to enslaved Black children? Exactly. So we need to begin to talk about these things, because when we begin to talk about why Black people are still so hurt, it's not just angry. Behind that rage is a hurting thing. It's a living, pulsing rage. And that's because unspeakable things were done to us. But if you can't speak about it, you can't prove it. And that's why I spoke about it. Was it difficult for me to write? Yes. And I got to tell you, I didn't want to write that section.
I think in telling the hard truths of all of these characters and having all of those different aspects, what I saw is that they all responded to what happened to them as children in a different way, and it formed who they were as adults. And I just think that if we don't acknowledge the pain that we have as children, because a lot of times we don't acknowledge child. It's like, oh, it wasn't that bad, it was just childhood. But that
walk it off.
Right.
Yeah,
but it continues with you and it never leaves you alone. And so I definitely saw that you did that in creating these characters.
In the same way that the abuse that Black people have suffered in this country when it was in its infancy is still with us, you know?
Very much so. So I'm gonna put a pin in that, and I want to do a speed round and like a little game before I let you go.
Okay.
What is your favorite book?
Their Eyes Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston.
Who is your favorite author?
Zora Neale Hurston. My second favorite is Toni Morrison.
Who is your favorite poet?
Lucille Clifton, bar none. Mic drop.
What brings you joy?
Right about now, sleeping. I'm so tired.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And what brings you peace?
Prayer.
If you were a color, what color would you be and why?
Orange. Orange is fire. Orange is vibrancy. Orange is beauty. Every color is jealous of orange. That's the way I feel.
That's a poet saying right there. All right. So my little game is called Rewriting the Classics. What's the one book you wish you would have written?
Oh, wow. The one book I wished I had written is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. That's a classic. That's a good book.
It is.
And it does everything, you know, culturally. I just love it. And, you know, Alice Walker's from Edenton. My mama's from Edenton. My mother taught Alice Walker. Yeah, I love that book.
I will tell this story, and I don't tell it often, but my very first freelance article for journalism was a couple of years ago. It was to interview Alice Walker. And she almost hung up on me.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, she
had, I think I had woken her up and I was nervous. And so she was tired. So it just wasn't a good.
It just wasn't a good, but y'all worked it out.
Yes, we worked it out.
Okay, good.
I worked it out. What's one book where you want to change the ending and how would you do it?
Ooh, I would love to change Their Eyes Were Watching God so that Tea Cake don't die. You know, that hurt me. Although when I first saw that he slapped Janie, I was like, this ain't gonna end well. I ain't know he was gonna die, but I was like, this ain't gonna end well. But I would have liked for him to have lived. It sort of hurt me that he did.
Okay. And then name a book that you think is overrated and why.
Oh, that's mean. That's mean. I ain't gonna be mean to no Black literature, but I would tell you everything by William Faulkner is overrated in my opinion. But you know, Professor Morrison loved him, and I really tried with him because of her. But I just, you know, he's racist, he's classist towards working class white people. He's just mean-spirited, and I just think everything that he's written is overrated. But do I think that he had a genius? I do, but I don't get it. And that happens a lot where everybody else is reading something and they're like, ooh, this is just real good. This real good. And you just like, are y'all high? Am I high? What's going on? I'm not feeling it, blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
that's my meme right there.
Okay. And now my final question for you today is, when you are no longer here and you are among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about you and the legacy of words and work that you left behind?
She loved us. That's it.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this week's Black and Published Rewind with Honorée Fanone Jeffers. If you haven't read The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois and want to, you can get it from Mahogany Books, where you can find a wide range of titles by Black authors and support a Black-owned business. Plus, listeners of this podcast can save 10% on regular price books and merchandise when you use the coupon code BLACKPUB. That's BLKPUB at checkout. Head over to mahoganybooks.com and grab your next great read today. I'll holler at y'all next week for another Black and Published Blast from the Past. Peace.